Welcome to another edition of Political Scope. My name is Juanita Huburn. Constitutionally, the budget is due at the end of the first quarter of 2015. On this edition of Political Scope, I'll be speaking with Dr. Ashni Singh, our Minister of Finance, to find out about his preparations for the laying of the budget in Parliament. Welcome to Political Scope.
Thank you very much, Juanita.
Let's start off by saying you, in your last budget presentations, you had a lot of positive outlooks for Ghana's economy, and of course, your projections were boosted by the evidence you placed in Parliament, as well as what the IDB and the World Bank has said about Guyana's economy and its growth, unparalleled over the last 8 years. Tell me, how are you preparing presently for the 2015 budget?
Sure. Well, once again, Juanita, thank you very much for inviting me to this program. You're absolutely correct in saying that Guyana has had an extremely strong run for the last 8 years or so, with uninterrupted positive growth at a time when the rest of the global economy and even the rest of, and in particular the rest of the regional economy, the Caribbean economy, have been encountering unprecedented difficulties. As I have said elsewhere and on many occasions, it is to the collective credit that we've been able to achieve this level of economic performance, and in a sustained fashion. And I say collective credit because obviously this government has discharged its responsibility with respect to establishing a conducive policy framework, one that is facilitative of growth. But the private sector has been displaying unprecedented confidence in the Guyanese economy. They've been investing, they've been expanding, they've been growing. The workers of Guyana have been contributing to this effort, to ensuring that they go to work every day and they produce and that they are competitive. The households in Guyana have been saving, they've been building, they've been acquiring assets, and you see the evidence of this in every respect, in home construction, wherever. And so it really is to the collective credit that we've achieved this extremely strong, collective national credit that we've achieved this strong economic performance. You ask about budget 2015, and in your prefatory remarks, you correctly identified that the Constitution requires the budget to be tabled by the expiration of 90 days into the fiscal year. We are working. The budget's production cycle, of course, is a long one. It starts, in a sense, it's almost uninterrupted because, particularly in an environment of policy continuity, every year's budget is not a standalone document. One budget flows essentially from the other because we haven't been hopping and skipping around with respect to policies. We've been very careful to ensure that there's policy stability and policy predictability, and so 1 year's budget and 1 year's policy orientation essentially flows from the other. And so the budget preparation cycle is one that starts quite early and has started. A lot of technical work has gone into preparing of the budgets. The various sectors have prepared their budgets and have submitted it to the Ministry of Finance. It's been reviewed. We have had meetings with the various ministries to ascertain what their priorities are, what their targets and what their aims are for the next year. And that technical work has commenced, and in fact is advanced. We're working, of course, on the assumption that we will be required to present a budget within the constitutional deadline, and we will be prepared to do so early in the new year. But of course, whether or not we do so will depend on how the parliamentary situation evolves. You know, of course, that the Parliament, your viewers know, of course, that the Parliament is currently prorogued an action that became necessary on the part of the President because of the prevailing political situation, and particularly because of the abuse of their one-seat majority by the political opposition. But we will be ready, the Ministry of Finance will be ready to present a budget within the constitutional deadline once the parliamentary conditions are in place.
The thing I want to ask you right now, because I know many of the viewers watching, there is uncertainty with the 10th Parliament. there has been a call for dialogue with the combined opposition and the president, and that has been roundly disowned and disapproved of. How do you, because so often we hear from the opposition that they want to contribute to the budget, they want to contribute to what those priorities are, and they want to have a say in it. Given what is unfolding now in Ghana's parliament, the 10th parliament, how are you going to reconcile the two?
Well, first of all, our party in government has a track record of being committed to dialogue and engagement, and a track record that can withstand scrutiny. It is this president who has consistently made himself available and made his administration available to dialogue and consultation, not only with the opposition, but indeed with the rest of the potential stakeholder groups, whether it's non-governmental organizations, civil society organizations, the community at large. It is this president who has written the opposition indicating his availability and extending an invitation to have dialogue. And it is the opposition that, like you quite rightly said just a few minutes ago, it is the opposition that has rejected and rebuffed that invitation and advance made by the president. Of course, this latest letter to the opposition is only the most recent example of the government's willingness to engage. We've always been willing to, and we've always been available to engage. The refusal by the opposition to engage is similarly not new. This is not the first time that the opposition has said they're not interested in talking. Indeed, I can think of a number of examples throughout the life of the 10th Parliament when we have made ourselves available to have dialogue or to consult with them, and where they have made themselves unavailable. Whether it is on the budget, I mean, we've had experiences, we all recall a few years ago when we were available to meet on the budget, and their chief spokesperson, I think, had left the country or something and was not available and didn't make himself available. I believe for some time they could not find him too. That I think was about a year, 2 years ago, or a year ago. And so this has been our experience. Whether it is a Mile of Falls, we have engaged with them on a Mile of Falls, we have shared with them all of the documentation. The president himself said, I'm willing to have you go away, study these documents, consult with your technical advisors, and come back and ask me any questions. They've never come back and asked any questions. But they did go back to Parliament and obstruct the project. And so I'm confident that the government's track record as it relates to willingness to engage and availability to have dialogue can withstand the most rigorous of scrutiny. And I'm equally confident that the opposition's unavailability to engage is beyond dispute.
Given this continuous unavailability to engage in dialogue, how are you going to then put forward a budget?
Well,
every citizen wants to know how this is going to affect them, and sometimes we lose sight of the fact that at the end of the day, it's the ordinary citizens who will be affected.
Well,
by
let me say this, that having said that they have typically been unwilling to engage, that does not mean that we are insensitive, that we are unaware of what their perspectives are. Because even if they might not engage with us in a face-to-face engagement, we have an accumulation of experience, whether it is from their public pronouncements, whether it is from their contributions to previous year's budget debates. We have an accumulation of experience with their pronouncements on what they consider to be important. In fact, this has been one of my main lamentations, even in the budget debate, that the opposition has typically obstructed the budget. As you know, they've imposed cuts, unconstitutional cuts, I hasten to add, on every budget that we have taken to the 10th Parliament. But nowhere in any aspect of the budget debate have they ever proffered an alternative. You've heard an abundance of objections, but you have heard very little by way of alternative. whether it is an alternative proposal, whether it is an identification of a different priority, whether it is a reordering of priorities. You've heard very little of that. And here again, I mean, there's an abundance of examples that I could give. I mean, we have highlighted the Amila Falls project as a viable project that is available, that has an investor that is ready to invest in the project. We have heard an abundance of criticism of Amila, but we have not heard a credible and viable alternative. They haven't said that there is another project out there that is available and ready to be implemented, and there's another investor willing to do it within the near term or within the foreseeable future. And so you have that problem. But having said that, like I said, we have an accumulation of documentation on what their views are. In addition to that, we have always engaged with other stakeholders and continue to be engaged on an ongoing basis with other stakeholders. So for example, we have an extremely strong engagement with the organized private sector. Here I refer, of course, to the private entities like the Private Sector Commission, the Chambers of Commerce, the sectoral representational bodies, whether it is the Tourism and Hospitality Association, Miners Association, Mega Craft Owners Association, whatever it is. And so we have an ongoing engagement throughout the year, first of all, with the representatives of various sectors, non-governmental representatives of various sectors. And there is input, there is significant non-governmental input into the policy-making function through established institutional mechanisms that we have. For example, we have an entity called the National Competitiveness Council, which has the president as its chairperson, but has high-level representation from both the organized private sector and organized labor. So you have representatives of the labor unions, representatives of the private sector bodies, etc. And that forum brings government and non-governmental stakeholders together to deliberate on priorities for the competitiveness of the national economy, priorities to facilitate greater investment and growth and job creation and so on. We have a multi-stakeholder steering committee overseeing the low carbon development strategy. Every one of our sector strategies has benefited from significant national consultation. Our national education plan has benefited from national consultation with every conceivable stakeholder. Our national health plan has benefited from extensive consultation with every conceivable stakeholder. Today, I had the privilege of participating in the launching, co-launching the MDG acceleration framework as it relates to maternal health. This is the 5th Millennium Development Goal. And that document, it essentially is a policy document. It's a document that identifies priorities for confronting the challenges of improving maternal health. The preparation of that framework benefited from extensive consultation. And all of these policy documents and these sectoral strategies that would have benefited from national consultations constitute important pillars of the budget. And so when we're speaking about social sector priorities, we're essentially speaking about health and education, housing and water, in which there are mature sector strategies that have had significant input from stakeholders. When we speak about competitiveness, growth, job creation, the National Competitiveness Council is a deeply entrenched institutional arrangement for non-governmental stakeholder input. And so there exists, I would say, adequate mechanisms, an abundance of mechanisms, well entrenched and strongly institutionalized mechanisms to facilitate stakeholder input into the policy-making function. And those mechanisms are working well. We will remain engaged with all of these stakeholders. Private sector, labor, this government, like I said, has a track record that can withstand scrutiny. We're constantly meeting with these stakeholder groups, receiving inputs, listening to their views. We might not always agree, and we might not be able to address every single one of their concerns or grant every single one of their requests, but we are not unaware of what their perspectives are, and neither are they unaware of ours.
Well, given all of that, do you think that you will be able to maintain and or surpass the over 4% growth that we've seen in the last 8 years under these circumstances?
Well, I would hesitate to be preemptive in disclosing a growth rate. We still have a few weeks to go, and I of course still need a reason to have to come back in January for you to interview me. So I would hesitate to, not least because we don't have a final growth numbers yet. There's still, like I said, another 4 weeks of production, and then it takes typically a few weeks, at least a month, for the data to come in and so on. I will say this, that the Guyanese economy is certainly still on course to grow. And we will once again see positive growth in 2014. And the data clearly indicates that, and there is very little that can happen in the remainder of the year, barring a major calamity perhaps. Mm-hmm. There's very little that can happen to derail that. I wouldn't disclose the growth numbers yet. I wouldn't say whether it would be in line with 4% or 4.5%. I would hesitate to do that at this point in time, except, like I say, to say that we're on course to another year of growth, positive growth.
You've had some challenges, though, not least of which is the parliamentary impasse we've arrived at, but you've had some challenges as well in the sugar sector. Do you think that is the budget going to reflect some more assistance for that sector in particular?
Well, you are right that sugar has certainly continued to struggle with its major challenges. We are seeing reports that the sugar industry is on course to achieving its production target, but that target is still really, and that's a good thing, but the level of sugar production is still not where the trajectory needs to be if the industry is to achieve a long-term viability and profitability. And so production really has to be ramped up rapidly. We, as a government, continue to believe that sugar is an extremely important contributor to the national economy and to national life. Entire communities are entirely dependent, whole communities are entirely dependent on the sugar industry. Entire villages are employed in some cases, or almost entire villages are employed in some instances by the industry, whether directly or indirectly. And so we're committed to ensuring the survival and viability of the industry going into the future. What this means is that we will continue to provide, we are firmly committed to continuing to provide the support that is necessary to ensure sugar's not just its survival, but restoration of its competitiveness and its long-term viability.
Now, you were able to steer Ghana's economy through the global crisis, where we saw very many Caribbean countries, Latin American countries, encountered severe problems with their economies. How did we get through it? I know Ghana is lauded, not just by locals, but also by international figures, and as well as the World Bank, that Ghana was able to withstand all of this. How were you able to do it?
Well, I will say this, that it took considerable effort to bring Guyana back to a place where we were once again first of all, viable as a nation. Because when the People's Progressive Party came into office, the country was bankrupt. Mm-hmm. And so in the first instance, we had to restore Guyana to financial economic viability, restore our credit worthiness with our international financial partners, restore our attractiveness to international investors, create a domestic environment of stability that would restore the confidence of domestic investors to save, to accumulate assets, to invest. And that's been a sustained effort, and it took a number of years. The point has been made, I think Dr. Luncheon has made the point before, and he makes it more eloquently than anybody else, that the first several years of the People's Progressive Party civic in government, post-1992 years, the first several years, perhaps comfortably the first 2 terms of office or so, were really a period of recovery, rebuilding, whether it's restoration of institutions, restoring our institutions of democracy and statehood, restoring our physical and social infrastructure, restoring our business environment. And so the first several years were expended in this effort to restore. And having made significant progress, I think there's still much that we are recovering from, and there's still elements that are to be restored, and given the extent of devastation wrought upon the country by the People's National Congress and government pre-1992. But given the progress that we've made in restoring Guyana's attractiveness and to investors and to the international investment community, I believe that that work having been done, maintaining a sound, responsible policy framework, sometimes making hard choices too, hard fiscal choices. I mean, there were often pressures to spend. There's no shortage of need for expenditure, but we had to ensure that we brought the fiscal deficit down by ensuring that we don't spend too much more than we are earning. Otherwise, obviously, just like a household, if you spend more than you're earning, you inevitably will end up being bankrupt. By ensuring that we borrow prudently, by ensuring that we improve the quality of our borrowing, improving the terms in which we borrow, etc. Essentially restoring all of those things by oftentimes, like I said, making hard policy choices. And what we saw was that after a sustained track record of policy responsibility, the international community, I think, then we once saw the expected response. And so I would say in the last 8 years or so, there has been a marked elevation of international confidence in Guyana. And there are a number of barometers of this. First of all, if you look at international investor confidence in Guyana, it's often not realized, but there are probably about 4 or 5 companies that are operating in Guyana that are quoted on international stock exchanges. Today we have companies that are listed on the Toronto Stock Exchange and companies that are listed on the Australian Stock Exchange in our natural resources sector, mining, gold, whether it's gold or manganese or bauxite, and of course offshore oil exploration. We have major international giants coming into Guyana. We have companies like Repsol, a huge multinational. Mm-hmm. We have companies like Exxon Mobil just recently opening and launching a subsidiary and a local office in Guyana. And so the international investment community has responded now, having had their confidence in Guyana as an investment destination restored. And the domestic investor community has also responded. So today you see more domestic businesses opening and expanding. I made the point, I think I spoke at the weekend somewhere, and I made the point that just over the last week or so, we have seen Quartz Unicoma, which is a major hemispheric company, open a new multi-million US dollar distribution center. We've seen Massey, which is a major regional conglomerate, one of the largest regional conglomerates, open a major distribution center in Guyana and rebrand themselves in Guyana. We've seen 2 commercial banks in the space of 2 weeks open 2 new branches in 2 new locations, one in Bartica, one in New Amsterdam. Just to give a few examples, and those are a mix. I mean, you have some international companies there, you have some regional companies, you have some domestic companies. And then household saving and investment. More Guyanese households today are saving, opening small businesses, building homes than ever before, buying motor cars. A person doesn't invest in a home unless taking out a mortgage and commencing home construction and building your home is a long-term commitment and signals some optimism of the future. If you are not optimistic or if you are unsure about the future, then you would probably be a little bit hesitant about making a binding long-term commitment. Today, thousands of Guyanese families are making these decisions, building homes everywhere. You just have to go, whether it's Grove, Diamond, Parfait, Harmony, Tushan, wherever. And in each one of these areas, like I said, there have been specific policies that we've implemented, like in housing, at the household level, to promote saving and to promote home construction. There's a particular policy mix that we've implemented to facilitate that activity. And so I would say that I would attribute Guyana's strong performance to policy responsibility and a sustained demonstration of policy responsibility on the part of the PPPC and government.
If you're just joining us, you are watching Political Scope. Today we're talking with the Minister of Finance, the Honorable Dr. Ashni Singh. We are, of course, Ghana is constitutionally due to see a budget laid in Parliament by the end of the first quarter of the first 3 months of 2015, and we are discussing how well Guyana is preparing for that budget. I just wanted to add to some of the things you mentioned, because all the examples you gave just now are good indicators of how our economy is performing. We're on track to realize the MDG of primary education in 2015. We are close to achieving secondary education. Infant mortality rate, we're on track for that, to see that a really big decline. We're seeing declines in mother-to-child transmission, in HIV, in the prevalence of HIV. We're also experiencing an unprecedented boom in the construction sector. And one of the things I just wanted to mention quite quickly is the fact that in addition to those things you've mentioned, your government has also taken some prudent steps, especially in the area of housing and construction, the lowering of the interest rate. You've made sure that and income tax rates, and you've amended the act for the NBS so that more people can access loans and so on. And you haven't only stopped at NBS. You've gone across to the other financial institutions. Can we expect more of this sort of prudent management?
Well, you can certainly be assured that the PPPC in government will continue to be focused on preserving and further enhancing the policy environment. We will continue to be responsible, and we will continue to ensure that the policy framework, overarching and sector-specific, are frameworks, I suppose, both overarching and sector-specific, are conducive to continued growth. You mentioned housing. The housing boom didn't happen by accident. It happened as a result of a specific set of policy initiatives implemented. Public sector investment in infrastructure to open new lands for housing development. Public sector financial support to facilitate distribution of low-income house lots. So government investing in infrastructure to ensure that the cost of the house lots would be affordable. You mentioned the fiscal incentives, ensuring that interest rates are low, and in particular in relation to low-income housing, specific fiscal initiatives, so removal of taxes on the interest earned by commercial banks on low-income housing loans to facilitate an even lower interest rate. We introduced just a couple of years ago mortgage interest relief, under which first-time homeowners get tax relief on the interest that they pay on a mortgage or a loan taken to buy their first home. And so all of those initiatives have come together to facilitate the phenomenal growth that you've seen in home construction. But of course, that then generates, in turn, a series of multiplier effects. Mm-hmm. You now have the financial sector lending more, and so the financial sector itself is doing better. You have you have entire communities being developed now, and so there's huge demand for commercial activity. And again, Diamond Grove is perhaps the most familiar for people who live in the Georgetown, East Bank, East Coast area. It's very visible. You have large new banks, you have new supermarkets, new petrol stations, you have new schools, new fire stations, new corner shops, all being constructed and coming into operation. And that in turn fuels the job creation, creates jobs for people in those communities, generates incomes, generates prosperity, and so on. So it's been a comprehensive policy matrix that we would have implemented in each one of these sectors to achieve that kind of growth.
And you have been doing this, truth be told, with an uncertain parliament, with an opposition that has been largely reluctant to support those many of those decisions and projects that we've seen government laid down. So I think on that note, we can surmise that despite all of that, we are still going to see Guyana moving ahead.
Well, this is our commitment, but it is equally clear to me that the opposition is bent on obstructing this progress for purely narrow political purposes. And it's very unfortunate that they are prepared to undermine the economy of Guyana in ad- solely for the purpose of advancing their own narrow political objectives. The obstructing of the money laundering legislation is a good example. That threatens the international credibility of our anti-financial system. Yet they are prepared to take that risk simply to achieve a political objective. And that's an extremely worrying situation. And so I think we would need to reflect as a government, and indeed we would need to reflect as a country, on how much longer we're prepared to allow the opposition to engage in this, how much longer we're prepared to allow the country to endure this behavior by the opposition, which is designed to undermine the interests of the people of Guyana, whom we are all elected to serve, all MPs.
Well, on that note, Minister, let me just wish you and your team all the best. We hope that you will have a good year, a good time getting this budget together, and we're certainly looking forward to seeing it laid at least by the time it's constitutionally due.
Thank you very much.
You've been watching Political Scope. My name is Vanita Huber, and I chatted tonight with the Minister of Finance, Dr. Ashni Singh. We hope you join us next time. Bye-bye.